Welcome to Peacock Alley. This is Gary Eminent. We're here with Dale Wetzel. We're broadcasting live from the historic Peacock Alley. And Dale, I noticed that they're fairly busy tonight, but there's a whole table of right-wingers down on the floor out there. I see a bunch of legislators and some Franklin guys and Rob Port and all these conservatives down there. So it's going to be an interesting night. Why don't you
start speaking English? What are Franklin guys?
Well, these are kind of guys that believe in liberty and freedom and promoting what guys like me believe that are related to conservative causes. So
Franklin guys.
The Franklin guys. Franklin, not Franklin Mint.
I thought you meant that they had like pockets stuffed full of $100 bills or something.
No, but I don't want to take too much of time, Dale, because tonight's Wind Down Wednesday. Yeah, they love the Constitution. And what's interesting, Dale, is we have three legislators here. I know they're all Republicans. One of them has a Ronald Reagan pin on it, so I'm proud to have him with us. In fact, I'm going to shake his hand. Representative Jim Casper. So
and wait till you hear what bill they're introducing.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. So tonight's Wind Down Wednesday. Dale, we have wine at half-price bottles. A lot of people come down on a Wednesday night to have wine at a special deal. You get a half-price bottle and some specials and appetizers. But we're not going to get lost on that with Peacock Alley because you have such an important bill. When I see this bill for what you're going to talk about before you go over it, I think of Al Olson and remodeling the governor's residence, which cost him probably a second term in the governor's residence. But I'm not going to go there right now.
I don't think it was Al Olson remodeling the governor's residence. It's just that he preferred to live in his home in Bismarck instead of moving into the governor's residence.
Yeah, that's a point taken. You got that one there. So anyway, Dale, what happened today at the Capitol today? It was a busy day, and I'd like to hear what you had. What happened?
Well, there's a couple of Sunday closing bills or blue law bills that were defeated in the House today. One of them would have given communities like Fargo and Bismarck and any community with home rule self-governing power the ability to allow their businesses to open earlier on Sunday if there was an ordinance passed to that effect. There was also a bill that would have allowed bars to open at 10 a.m. on Sundays. Both of these were defeated. And the argument for the local option Sunday opening, so to speak, one of them was that it would provide more time for our Canadian neighbors to come down and shop in Grand Forks and Fargo. They usually go back on Sundays, and maybe they could get up a bit earlier, go down to the West Acres or Columbia Mall shopping centers in Fargo and Grand Forks and spend a bit more money. But this this argument was not persuasive to two-thirds of the House of Representatives. They defeated these ideas. One of the folks who was critical of it was the House Majority Leader, Al Carlson. He said, we don't have enough workers here for the jobs that we have, and now we're going to put more strain on the workers who are already here. And there were other folks who mentioned that they had not heard any hue and cry for businesses to open earlier on Sundays. So that was what happened there. In the Senate spent quite a bit of time on amendments on abortion bills, which will be heard tomorrow. They'll get a full vote tomorrow. One of the questions was the precise wording of a constitutional amendment that would essentially ban abortion. There was a wording change from defending life. Life shall be defended to life shall be protected. The final wording was life shall be protected, and there was some back and forth about just what the reason was for that change. And the sponsor of the amendment, Senator Margaret City of Bismarck, said one of her reasons is that protected sounded less militaristic than defended. But we'll see how that amendment goes over in the Senate tomorrow. They'll have a vote on it. And also in the Senate, they approved a 1% gross proceeds flat tax on gambling revenues for North Dakota's charitable gambling industry. A gross proceeds tax is a tax on wagers, everything that's bet. If you bet $2 on a hand of blackjack, that is the gross proceeds. It's before the prizes are paid. The amount.
So that'd be 2 cents on $2.
Yes,
2
and
cents.
This before we had a 1% to 2.5% structured tax brackets. It which tax applied depended on how much money the charity took in. This would change that structure to a 1% flat tax, which of course would be easier to implement. It also would save the charitable gambling industry, approximately $4.3 million over 2 years. We're here tonight with three gentlemen to talk about another subject entirely, and that is the governor's residence. The governor's residence has been around since the early 60s. The first governor to live in it was Governor John Davis. And it's a ranch-style home. It's on a corner of the Capitol grounds within easy walking distance of the Capitol. It's undergone some recent repairs, and there is some sentiment that it needs to be given a more extensive, essentially that it needs to be replaced, and it needs to be replaced by another home and a kind of a conference center that is more suited perhaps to hosting larger events that the governor might want to host. And we have with us this evening on the legislature today three of the sponsors of that bill. We have the primary sponsor, Representative Matt Klein. He is a Republican from Minot. He is a former Speaker of the House. He was the Speaker of the House during the 2009 session, and he is a member of the Capitol Grounds Planning Commission, and he became quite familiar with the issues involved in the governor's residence and the maintenance thereof as a member of the Capitol Grounds Planning Commission. We have Representative Jim Casper. He's a Republican from Fargo. Representative Casper sponsored a similar bill 4 years ago during the 2009 session, and it was defeated in the House. We also have another co-sponsor of this bill, Representative Blair Thorson. He is a Republican from Fargo. He is the chairman of a House Appropriations Subcommittee that has authority, or it reviews the governor's office budget. Now, just to begin, the governor himself, Jack Dalrymple, does not support this bill. I interviewed him a couple of days ago about the bill, and this is what he said.
I don't think it's a good idea. I don't know where it's coming from. It just kind of fell out of the sky. You know, I've told everybody that, I don't think it's a very good idea. I really don't see the need for it. The residence is a perfectly fine house, nothing wrong with it. Of all the needs that we have in North Dakota right now, I mean, I wouldn't even put that on the list. There are needs and there are other needs. That's not one of them.
Thank you, Corey.
And that is what the governor said. He said that there are needs and there are other needs, and this is not one of them. This bill would set aside $3 million to construct a new governor's residence and conference center. Representative Klein, you're the prime sponsor of this bill, and could you just tell us why you think it's necessary?
Well, as I said, I've had the privilege of being on the Capitol Grounds Planning Commission for a number of years now, and we've looked at this, at the repairs that got done to it. We had some major roof leaks. We had the roof repaired. We had some leaks down into the basement. Again, then we hired an architect to give us an estimate of what would it cost to bring this thing up to speed. He has now come back to us with a rough estimate of about $280,000 just to repair the facility. We looked at that and said, you know, with all the unknowns that are still there, with probably some water leaks that have created some problems. We've got asbestos in the place. He wouldn't be able to indicate just how bad they are. We don't meet ADA requirements. We'd be much better off just tearing the place down and building a proper facility.
Where do you think this proper facility should be located, sir?
At the same location. We would just tear this place down. One of the things that you have to remember is there's no general funds involved. We are using Capitol Grounds dollars. There's about $3 million in that kitty, and we expect to raise at least another $1.5 million private funds and then build the facility.
So what is the cost of the project that you envision?
Well, right now we don't have much of it. We have just got a rough estimate of about $4.5 million.
And what would this buy us? What would it buy us?
Oh, we would have a complete new facility that has, we'd have additions to the parking area. It would be a class facility that would really fit in very nice with our new Heritage Center. It's just the time, if we're going to ever do it. This facility, as you mentioned, got completed in 1960. The only time anything was done to it of significance was when Schaefer moved in 93. There was some private money he raised, about $400,000 to recarpet and repaint and bring some things up to snuff. But no major things have been done to fix it up.
What do you think that the governor's residence lacks that it does? What do you think the residence lacks that it should have?
Well, right now he hasn't even got an office.
Representative Casper, you sponsored a bill of this nature about 4 years ago, and could you tell us what you think of Representative Klein's analysis and what you learned about the governor's residence and the opinions you formed when you were introducing your own bill?
Well, Dale, the analysis of Representative Klein is right on. We have estates that is one of the shining lights in the whole country. We have people coming in from all over the United States and actually all over the world to see what we're doing in North Dakota. The governor entertains these types of dignitaries, and we take them to a facility where there's mold in the roof, and I think it's unsafe for the governor's family to be there. I can understand why the governor would not say he's in favor of the residence, but I'd like to remind our listeners that this is the people's residence. It's not the government. It's not Jack Dalrymple's residence. It will be there for the future use of the people of our state. So in 2009, I saw the need back then and said, now let's try. And I really applaud Matt Klein for bringing this bill forward, and I think it's time. We want to be a showcase for the world and the nation, and we have the funds. And as Representative Klein said, there's going to be a lot of private funds raised. I've talked with Nancy Schaefer, the former First Lady, and she's jumping at the bit to get involved to help raise the private funds. It'll be no problem whatsoever to raise the private funds. It's time to do it.
What do you think that the governor's residence lacks in terms of facilities or amenities?
Well, Dale, I think it lacks everything. I have not been into the private side of the residence where the governor lives, but I can tell you the public side, the entertainment area lacks. There's no room. When he entertains the legislature, and we're coming over there, I think, on the 19th of February, there's not any room for the legislator and their spouses to be in the facility. There's no room. I say this with all respect. The residence right now reminds me of what a good groundskeeper housing would be on a nice golf course in Arizona. It's just not a statement we need to make for the people of North Dakota. Our citizens need to be able to come and tour that residence and feel proud of something. Look at what South Dakota has done. You look at their facility, it's magnificent. If South Dakota has a facility like that, North Dakota has something better.
I'm interested that you raised the South Dakota subject, because do you think that a South Dakota-like residence for the North Dakota governor would be a bit too showy?
Not at all. I mean, North Dakota, we're proud of who we are. We're proud of what we've done. We're proud of what we're going to do. It's time to get into the 21st century and let the world know who we are and what we're all about. So the showier the better from my perspective.
Representative Thorson, you're the chairman of a subcommittee that looks over the governor's budget. Could you tell me, why did you get on this bill? Why did you think it was something that was worth your time?
Well, first of all, I'd like to commend Matt for putting this bill in. Again, Jim did this a couple of sessions ago, and I signed on that time and took a little bit of heat because I'm very fiscally conservative. But I think this is money well spent, and we're not taking money out of the general fund. We're using a special fund for the Capitol and the grounds there to do this. And, I'm on this bill because, Gary, earlier you mentioned Ronald Reagan. Today is Ronald Reagan's birthday.
Oh, my goodness.
He was 102 years old today had he lived. And Ronald Reagan saw the greatness of our country, and I think we need to look at the greatness of our state. We have a chief executive who is the person that we choose to put in that house and in that office, and we should have a first-class facility. We're a first-class state. We shouldn't have housing like a third-world nation for the governor.
I got a question here. There's 3 Republicans sitting around the table, and most of you call yourself fiscal conservatives. Do you think this gives the Democrats ammo to talk about spending money frivolously, $3 million for a house? I mean, it's the governor's residence, but I just like to get a reaction to I mean, I don't care if it's in a kitty or not. We're talking $3-4 million. This is not chump change. At least my checking account is not chump change.
If we were taking money out of the general fund and taking it away from other programs, I think then they might have a case. This is something dedicated especially for the capital, for the people of the state. And this is about a building that Democrats and Republicans will someday live in. I'm sure someday we'll have a Democrat governor again. Of course, I'd like to see it many, many years from now. But that's something 80, 90, 100 years from now, it should still be a beautiful house.
I'd also point out that we have 2 co-sponsors who are Democrats, Representative Glassheim and Senator Marcellet. So we do have bipartisan support on the bill.
I might interject here that when I first went into the governor's residence was when Governor Sinner was governor. And it was a dump. It was there was a lot of repair work done after that, but the person who really got things going in terms of trying to raise money to repair the residence was Jane Sinner, Bud Sinner's wife, the first lady at the time. I mean, there were water stains. The carpet was it was a mess. And I mean, usually when folks talk about, oh, we need a new building, you know, this thing is threadbare, this thing is awful, I'm a little dubious about that. But I went over there one day, and the person who was the caretaker of the residence at the time took me through it and showed me all of these, you know, big water stains on the roof. I mean, the roof was leaking, and the carpet in places was ruined, and I mean, it's in much better shape now than it was then. And I've not been inside the governor's residence in a number of years, but when it was first fixed up, and during the Sinner and later the Schaefer administrations, it was a mess.
It looks interesting to me if 3 conservatives are on the table and you got Dale on kind of weighing in on this. It looks like this is a slam dunk. It looks like the governor.
No, I to be honest with you, I don't necessarily agree with what's being said about how the residence now is in terrible shape, but back then it certainly was. I mean, there was no question about it.
There's still problems over there today.
Yes, there's still mold in the area and a lot of problems. Yeah. But I would say this, and I would encourage the governor, if this bill passes the House and the Senate with bipartisan support, I hope the governor just signs the bill and doesn't think that he by signing the bill he's putting himself out that he supports it. The people will have spoken, and I hope the governor would sign the bill. And we, if we need to raise $2 or3 million instead of $1.5 million private funds, we can do that.
One of the things that I've heard about the residence, and it has nothing to do, frankly, with whether it has mold or whether it can host large gatherings or whatnot, is the appearance of it, what it looks like. I wanted to ask each of you, when you first saw the governor's residence, what did you think it looked like?
I drive by and go, dun, 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 dun. It reminds me of the Brady Bunch house.
How about you, Representative Klein?
It's definitely a 1950s design, and we're quite a few years beyond that. One other thing I'd like to point out, we've been using this Capitol grounds money, for instance, to polish the brass. And look at what it did to that Capitol. Some years ago, that black onyx in that great hall was cleaned. Beautiful. Last year, we cleaned the whole outside and retucked it. Some of that's proper usage of money to maintain what you've got.
Do you think that the $3 million, though, could be spent elsewhere on the Capitol grounds to just as much benefit?
Not right now. I think we've pretty much caught up with maintenance-type preventive actions that we need to do.
Representative Casper, when you first saw the governor's residence, what did you think it looked like?
Well, Dale, I was disappointed. My hometown is Beulah, and we don't have a bunch of big magnanimous homes in Beulah. But I thought, this is where the governor lives. I said, our state deserves better.
One of the reasons I asked the question is I asked that question of Nancy Schaefer when she was obviously very involved in the fundraising and she and Governor Sinner's wife, Jane Sinner, the former First Lady, they both were very involved in the fundraising that resulted in the repairs that were made to to the governor's residence a number of years ago. And Nancy Schaefer said in this kind of stage whisper voice, "It looks like a rest home." She thought it looked like a nursing home.
Yep.
And it was that struck me because I hadn't thought about that, but I thought that is reasonable. I mean, especially when you drive around North Dakota and look at enough nursing homes, it does kind of look like a nursing home.
it fits into our architecture. You know, it's kind of a Frank Lloyd Wright, but when
Sure.
you do go inside, you do kind of go. It's fairly the typical North Dakota style. So you know, I get what you're saying, Representative Casper, that there's something about North Dakota for a change. We're really kind of going places, and it's kind of like, you know, maybe it's our chance to put our toe in the water and step out a little bit more.
Well, I can guarantee you, if that new residence is built, when the people come in, they're going to say, "Wow." And that's what we want them to say. They want to look at us, and we want them to say, "Wow." Not only our citizens, but the people come and visit us from all around the world.
You're right. This is our time.
What if they come in and say, "Boy, you blew a lot of money on this showplace"?
Well, then say maybe you came to the wrong place.
I guess the question is, if the oil stays strong for 20 years, that'll be the test. If everything keeps going, if oil goes to about $35, it won't be so great in about 12 months. But that's the question, right? So,
right, but that also gives us the opportunity now when we have the funds coming in. And I think some of the money from the Capital Building Fund comes from oil revenues. Am I right, Representative Klein?
That's correct.
That's one of the reasons why there's so much of it.
So here's a lasting legacy we can use with some of those dollars.
Yep.
Well, we've been speaking this evening with Representative Matt Klein, a former Speaker of the House, a Republican from Minot. We have been talking to Representative Jim Casper of Fargo, a Republican from Fargo, and also Representative Blair Thorson, who is a vice chairman of the, or who is, I should say, is chairman, excuse me, of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on the that oversees the governor's office budget. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
this is Gary Emineth and Dale Wetzel. We're broadcasting live from Peacock Alley. And join us for the next half hour as we take a break from the legislature today at Peacock Alley. Wine Down Wednesday. Wine, half-price bottles of wine. Thanks for staying with us. Welcome to Peacock Alley. This is Gary Emineth, your host, Dale Wetzel. This is the legislature today. You're listening to Live. Dale, we had an interesting session this last half hour discussing the whole area of remodeling the governor's residence. And that was interesting, but you're going to have a whole change of venue here in the next 30 minutes. So why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
Our guests this evening are Representative Keith Kempenich. He's a Republican from Bowman, and he is Vice Chairman of the Senate, or the House, excuse me, Vice Chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. He is the sponsor of one of the resolutions we're going to be talking about. We also have Mr. Curly Haugland, who is the Republican National Committeeman for North Dakota and a former state Republican Party chairman. We also have Mr. John Gosbee. He's an attorney in Mandan. He serves as the Sioux County State's Attorney. He has experience in referendum and initiative campaigns, and that is why he is on this evening, because that is what our subject is. There are several proposals in the legislature that would, it's fair to say, would make it more difficult to put something on the ballot. And by put something on the ballot, I mean it would make it more difficult to initiate a measure or to refer a measure. What an initiated measure is something that's put on the ballot directly by the people of North Dakota. If the folks who support a particular proposal can get enough signatures on a petition, they can put something directly on the ballot and bypass the legislature. What our current standards are for an initiated measure, you need to get signatures equal to at least 2% of the resident population of North Dakota as it was taken in the last federal census. To put a constitutional amendment directly on the ballot, you need at least 4% of the population of North Dakota at the last general census. What we're talking about, basically a number of names, is approximately 15,000 names for a initiative petition, approximately double that, 28,000 names or so, 29 for a initiated constitutional amendment. What we're going to be speaking about first is what a resolution that Representative Kempenich is sponsoring. It would require a constitutional amendment, an initiated constitutional amendment, not a initiated law, but a constitutional amendment to have a certain diversity of signature collection. You would still need 4% of the resident population of North Dakota, the equivalent, and these people would have to be eligible voters. You'd still need that many folks to sign your petition for a constitutional amendment, but you would have to get these folks, you would have to get at least 4% of the population of at least 27 counties, which is 50% of the number of counties in North Dakota. Representative Kempenich, can you tell me why is it that you put this in? What motivated you to do it?
Well, one thing, Dale, is this got, I've been thinking about this actually on the constitutional side for a few years, but what was one of the catalysts, I guess, was last spring with the conservation fund that was getting drafted, and it more concerned me about when initiated measures, especially constitutional, when you start appropriating money out of the Treasury through this method, because you don't know, people don't know what it's going to, they were talking 5% of oil, which way it would work out if that would have passed would have probably been over $100 million that a unelected body would have access to. And right, wrong, you can argue the merits of what that was trying to do, but the thing is when you start appropriating money out of the Treasury in this fashion without the whole picture of this, it gets pretty dangerous in one fashion, and I think California has proven that a lot of their budget has been done by initiated measures over the years, and they're pretty much tied into it. I mean, there's 80% of their budget spent before they even start the session. So what got me concerned about especially constitutional measures, initiated measures are one thing, I didn't want to look at that, but what got me concerned about constitutional measures is they're very hard to change once they're in there, and we're seeing that even with the legacy money. I mean, the wording on it, the intent is there, but the thing is to work with it. It gets very hard to work the language if it's not worded right, and it gets, and there's some things like in the legacy fund could, make it, it's going to make it interesting to see how this gets worked out when it starts being used here in like 4 years. And that, like I said, the Constitution is more of a solid document. It's pretty tough to start changing that, and that's what got me going with this bill, was to get a broader brush, shall we speak, of the citizens of North Dakota. And it's kind of what got the reason I did it this way was nationally it seems to work. Constitutional amendments should be tough to get. I mean, they should be hard to get on the ballot, and they should be well thought out when they do get there. And this was one thing where you'd have to get a fair amount of North Dakota to buy into your idea. If it's a good idea, I don't think it'd be a big problem. If it's something that is a small group or something, where they can go basically to the populous parts of the state or go to the fair or something where it's going to be a little tougher. There's no doubt about it.
And just so that we're clear, what this would require is you would need 4% of the population of each of 27 counties, 50% of, we have 53 counties in North Dakota, and so more than 50% of that is 27 counties. So you would need the equivalent number of eligible voters, 4% in each of 27 counties, to sign a petition to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot. Why did you pick 50%? Why not 75%? Why not 25%?
Well, it's an arbitrary number, but I figured you should have, and that's something that, we kind of talked about. Originally, I didn't have the 4% in, but then when you look at Fargo in their last election, basically 4% would give you over 12,000, I think, well, actually it was 15,000 votes that, signatures you could collect out of one area, so it really defeated the purpose of even if you did, and to make it work, so you spread it around the state. You can collect your 15 or 17,000 signatures out of Cass County, but it isn't going to do any good. But you go to a place like, say, we'll take Slope County. Well, you'd only need 40 signatures out of Slope County to make the same thing work. And it's just the petition part of it is to spread it around. You know, you still would have to, it's still got to go to a vote of the people. There's no doubt about it. But it's more of that this idea is thought out, you know, that it's something that the North Dakota can get behind. It isn't just one geographical area that's supporting it.
Mr. Gosbee, what do you think about this approach that putting an initiated constitutional amendment on the ballot requires a kind of geographic diversity of signature collection?
Well, I think geographic diversity is sort of a name just to make it more difficult to propose an amendment. The sponsor actually says it's dangerous to have people doing this. The sponsor forgets that under the Constitution, Article 3, Section 1, the people are the sovereign. It says legislative power is given to a legislative assembly, but the people reserve to themselves the power of initiative, referendum, and recall. That means the people are the sovereign, not the legislature. The idea that I'm not sure what the problem is about getting votes at a fair, because presumably they'd be well spread out if you could have like the state fair. But it adds to the mechanical difficulty of handling the petition, because you'll have to ask every signer which county he lives in. You can't necessarily tell by an address, because postal addresses are not designed to coincide with county lines. So you'd have to ask every signer. You'd have to have a space, I suppose, on the signature, show what county he's from. Would you send it to the auditors of all 53 counties to verify that? I don't know what county Mr. Representative Kempenich is from. Where are you from, sir?
Bowman.
Bowman, you know, would if he signs, I guess it's probably safe to assume he wouldn't sign this one, but if he signs another one, does does somebody in Bowman County have to decide that that's, you know, he really lives in Bowman? And that just adds to the difficulty. I trust the people. The 4% rule on constitutional measures and the 2 on initiatives and referrals. That's adequate protection. If you do not have statewide support, you're going to feel it at the ballot box. And the sponsor brings up the issue of, like, you could get, you know, if you got your 4% in cast, you'd be almost all the way there on an initiated measure, statutory measure, or a referral. But the thing that would terrify me as an organizer is if I'd lose Cass County if I had, say, 12,000 out of Cass, and I'd be thinking I've got, wow, 1 down, 26 to go. Whoop, there was a Cass. Now I've got to try to find the other one and rush out to Bowman County or Slope County and see if I can get the other signatures. And I just have more faith in the people than this bill implies.
There's Mr. Haugland. Do you know, as a political party official, does the Republican or the Democratic Party, for that matter, have any stake in how difficult it is or how easy it is to initiate and refer legislation?
Well, I think both political parties ought to owe allegiance to the Constitution, and I want to follow up on what Mr. Gosbee said. Article 3 of our state constitution precedes Article 4. It says Article 3 is powers reserved to the people. I just want to read that because it's important. While the legislative power of the state shall be vested in a legislative assembly, the people reserve the power to propose and enact laws by the initiative, including the call for a constitutional convention, to approve or reject legislative acts or parts thereof by the referendum. The important part here, to propose and adopt constitutional amendments by the initiative, and to recall elected officials. This article is self-executing, and all of its provisions are mandatory. Laws may be enacted to facilitate and safeguard, but not to hamper, restrict, or impair these powers. And frankly, what I see here, Article 3, Section 1 is what I just read you. Article 4, Section 16 is the section of the Constitution that was added sometime later that authorizes the legislature to propose constitutional amendments. And frankly, I think we have a direct conflict in our Constitution because somehow or another the power of the people has been expropriated. Because if I have reserve a power, it's kind of like reserving a mineral right. We all understand that. If I reserve the minerals to my property, that doesn't mean somebody else can come in and drill them.
Yes.
And here we have a situation where we reserve the power to initiate constitutional amendments, and yet the legislature's coming in and trying to drill on our property.
No, well, this here's got to go to the vote of people. Anything constitution's got to go to the vote of the people. But the thing is that though it's brought up is with doing this. Granted, it makes it a little more of a challenge. But the other object of this is that when you start appropriating monies, on it. That's where it gets to be. It's one thing about constitutional measures that have some type of restrictions or some type like that. But when you start appropriating, that becomes another precedence that you read the Constitution. I don't see many laws in the Constitution that appropriate money. And so you start going down that track, and you have to start looking at it. And why did the founders of our country put it in where you needed the amount of restrictions, that come into passing, national constitutional amendments and stuff? I mean, that's very difficult to pass constitutional and national constitutional amendments, and it isn't trying to restrict anybody, and it doesn't prohibit anybody. And granted, if you got a lot of money behind this probably isn't a big challenge either. There isn't. But if it is a good idea, I don't think this would be a real big hurdle. If it is a good idea, I think you could get buy-in. You could get people in different counties to champion an idea and stuff. I think it'd actually spread it out where people would understand that. And we went around this last year with Measure 2 was another issue, if you want to get into that. That was a constitutional amendment, too, that if it would have passed, would have been really interesting to see how that mechanics would have worked. And like I said, you get stuff in the Constitution, it's hard legislatively, you can't do anything. You got to pretty much, if there's an is or an and or letters that are out of place, it gets very tough to start changing that because and that's one of the issues about constitutional amendments. Initiated measures? No, I think that's the voice of the people. And this, like I said, this is going to be, this has got to be voted on too. This is nothing but a proposal. I mean, it's granted I didn't go out and get signatures, and like I said, it's not anything that isn't going to take a vote of the people to pass. But like I said, when you can't work with it or make it work, it gets to be a real big challenge on how to do this.
I just want to point out, though, Keith, I was involved in the initiated constitutional amendment to fix the eminent domain laws when the U.S. Supreme Court screwed up our property rights via the Kelo case. And so I have firsthand experience, and it's not easy to get enough signatures, even if you get some at the state fair. It's a lot of hard work. We did it with all volunteers. Yeah. We eventually got the signatures, but it isn't easy. And I don't think that if you follow the clear intent of our own Constitution, where it reserves these powers, we say laws may be made acted to facilitate and safeguard, but not to hamper, restrict, or impair these. And I'm suggesting that your measure might even be constitutionally violative here.
Well,
that's always a court.
That's an interesting theory that a constitutional amendment can violate the Constitution.
It can, I think. Well, we have a direct conflict. I mean, consider what I just brought out earlier, that we actually have two sections of the Constitution appear to be in direct conflict with one another. Yeah. We can't reserve the power to the people and yet have the legislature usurp it.
Yeah, speaking of, Representative Kempenich, you mentioned the perils of budgeting by initiative, so to speak. A couple others proposed constitutional amendments, and you're not a co-sponsor of either one of them.
I know of them, though.
Anyway, they would make it much more difficult to initiate and refer measures that involve budgetary questions. One of them would essentially impose new requirements on any initiative that has a financial impact of more than $20 million. Another one essentially would give the legislature the power to veto a initiated measure if it had an impact of at least $40 million. And I would like to know your opinion. I mean, you mentioned your disquiet about initiatives, but about budgeting by initiative, and how the state of California has gotten itself into a twist with that kind of practice. But do you think that these sorts of more severe restrictions on initiative and referral are justified in budgetary situations.
Well, I think, and like the one, I think those are I don't think they're constitutional initiated, are they? The one is.
They're both constitutional amendments. Constitutional amendments.
Well, see, the veto one, yeah, that'd be a stretch to, if people, you go into that and have veto authority on a constitutional, I think that you'd have to. Truthfully, I don't know how you'd make that work, because I think you'd run into a conflict of separation of powers in a lot of ways, on especially if you're going against the courts or against the people, although the courts have ruled in other states, have ruled constitutional measures invalid on it, and that'd probably be the legislature. I don't know, that might be a stretch that way. It might, but I think that, like I said, when you get into the budgetary issues, it does get to be very dangerous in a lot of ways, because you don't see the whole picture. You got one small slice of the pie of your interests, and it gets to be very, because you can impact human services, you can impact a lot of safety issues. I mean, for something that maybe not, it's a priority to that group, but it might not be a priority to the state. And so I think it gets, and truthfully, the people are smart. I mean, that's one thing we have in this state, is we don't have a lot of low information voters like other states. It seems like we have a lot of people that pay attention to this stuff. And so it's the one thing that did bother me, though, and that's why this was in, because the geographical areas that, when you look at North Dakota, it does make it tough. And like I brought up the state fair, yeah, and it would be exactly like Mr. Gosbee said, was there would be another column on the side of the petition that you'd put what county you were from. And truthfully, the way they go through it right now is they pull, I don't know, every 15 names or every one out of every 15 or one out of every 100, to check to see if it's real. That's more than likely what had happened anyways, as far as checks go on it. You can never, the integrity is only as good as the people that are doing it. And you aren't going to change that process any. If somebody wants to scam the system, it'll more than likely show up like it did last spring when they started checking the names. They didn't check out, and then they start getting deeper. But I think right now, what this would do is I don't think it would be that big of a challenge to get another column on that petition sheet to have what county you're from.
Speaking of additional columns on the petition sheet, the House has already passed a bill, and this is a bill and not a constitutional amendment, that would require people who sign initiative and referendum petitions and recall petitions too, not only to sign their names but to print their names. And basically what we have here as well is a de facto requirement that you list your county of residence as well. So we're going to have two additional columns on a petition, one listing the printing of your name, the other the county in which you live. Mr. Gosbee, how difficult how much more of a logistical challenge is this going to pose when you need to make sure that the person lists their county and also prints their name? And is it going to make it more difficult to get a signature if a person has to write all that stuff down?
I'm going to try to corner the market in huge clipboards, because that's what we're going to need if we have to put in these two new pieces of information. One thing concerns me much more than the size of clipboards. Twice tonight we have heard the word dangerous in terms of the people exercising their sovereign power. And to me, that argument is dangerous on its face. It is. If you can't trust the people, who can you trust? We're placing our trust in the legislature, not the other way around. And they've got a responsibility to us, and to call us dangerous is not commendable. That's a polite.
Well, it's the lack of information that's dangerous. It isn't the people that are dangerous. It's lack of information, and the problem is it's the budgetary part of it that's the danger of it. It isn't the people making the.
Maybe it's about time some of the money came back to us instead of being spent like crazy.
Well, that's what we're doing. We're getting.
If it were up to me, I'd shrink the government in half. I'd squeeze it back into the Capitol. I'd let them have those 2 floors that they didn't fill back in '35, but they have to fit in the Capitol.
But I think, along the lines of that conversation, I think one of the dangerous things the legislature has been doing, frankly, Keith, is engaging in redistribution
And I know we're not here to talk about that necessarily, but we got the Constitution is intended to guide us in how we do this stuff. But we're taking money from oil people and redistributing it to people who have no own property. There's no connection. The state has no authority to collect property taxes. So how do you justify giving it back?
I'll tell you, this is really a box we've got ourselves into. It's very tough because we are. And you see other mineral states, I serve as chairman on the Legacy Board now, and we've talked to Alaska's got a large fund. We are getting ourselves in a box with this because people get used to that money, and it does get to be a very big challenge of how do you work with it. And we're trying to get some of it back. But it gets to be a challenge. You hit it right on the head because it is a big challenge to try to get this without being redistributing the funds like we are. And I don't know what we're going to do with that. That'll be another segment, I'm sure, on this.
Oh yes, we're going to. I think we'll invite all three gentlemen back to talk about. Maybe a spendthrift state government and over-reliance on oil revenues. But in the meantime, we'll have to wrap up our discussion this evening. We've had with us today Representative Keith Kempenich, a vice chairman of the House Appropriations Committee and sponsor of a constitutional amendment that would require more geographic diversity in signatures when it comes to collecting initiative and referendum petition signatures. We have Republican National Committeeman Curly Haugen of Bismarck, a former state party chairman, and we have Mr. John Gosbee, an initiative and referral activist and the Sioux County State's Attorney. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Curly should have become national chairman.